is the Nurses Doing GAMSAT podcast, brought to you by Thankfully GAMSAT. We're here to teach you how to smash the GAMSAT, get into medicine, and become a flippin' great doctor.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Nurses Doing GAMSAT podcast. I'm Dr. Tom, founder and CEO of Thankfully GAMSAT. You've heard the rumors, you've seen the memes, but what actually went down in the September 2025 GAMSAT? That's what we're talking about today. I'm joined by our outgoing lead tutor, Urvi. Welcome, Urvi.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here again.
Yeah, it's a bittersweet podcast today because you're leaving us at the end of this. Well, that was your last GAMSAT.
Yes, a very emotional final GAMS.
I know, yeah. So for those who don't know, Urvi has been a tutor with us for 4 years now, the whole medical school experience. And it's been an amazing experience. You've really changed the way that we do things and taken it to another level. And I'm really grateful that we've had this time. And I'm disappointed that you're becoming a doctor.
I haven't heard that one before, but
I'm kidding. No, I think it's going to be. I'm really excited to see how you go. You're going to love it, and you've been kicking ass in med school and kicking ass here. And so today we're doing a debrief of the recent GAMSAT. We're going to unpack what made this exam different, what real students faced over the weekend, and most importantly, what you should do differently in your sitting for March 2026. Now, if you want to get any of the resources that we talk about here today, go to the show notes. Everything's linked in there. And if this has been helpful, follow and subscribe to make sure you don't miss the next one. So let's talk about each section, Urvi, and kind of go through them. I know section 1 isn't your specialty area, but we can kind of have a talk about your experience when you did it back in the day, and I'll talk about our students' experience with section 1 and what they've been saying. But so section 1, for those who don't know, 62 questions. This time there were a few surprises. It's often like this where people have different experiences of the exam. You've probably found that too, Urvi. You hear one student will say, "Oh, it's this." For section 3, they might be like, "There's no chemistry." Other ones will say it's completely all chemistry, and that kind of happened with section 2, where section 1, where people were saying that it's mostly long reading passages. We had a few people say that that there are long passages, and the challenge with that is you have a lot of reading, a lot of understanding to do in a short amount of time. And we'll talk about how to overcome that in a second. Whereas what's a surprise, and that's kind of what usually happens with section 1. It's long passages, and you got to get through a lot. This year or this September, a surprise was that there were a few single line quotes with minimal context, kind of like section 2. What are your thoughts on that, Urvi?
Yeah, I think it adds another level of, first of all, surprise to the students, because they're so trained to interpret and really flesh out the meaning from large texts. And then also there's not a lot to work with. It's like almost like a cartoon, but with even less information. So that I found that really interesting, and it's quite classic with, you don't know what to expect with section 1.
Yeah, expect the unexpected.
That's true.
And that kind of sounds to me, it kind of sounds to me almost like an essay quote, like just a one-liner, and then ask questions. Whereas in section 2, you got to write an essay. Here, you'll be asked, 2 or 3 questions about it, or multiple choice. So how would you approach that if you were faced with this? I mean, because you do section 2. You've done section 2 tutoring with us in section 3. So from your section 2 knowledge, if people have to think on the fly here, and that's what you have to do in the GAMS, and go, all right, I haven't faced a one-line quote in section 1 before. How do I use my section 2 skills in this arena? How would you do that?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The first thing is to recognize what the challenges would be with something like this. And I think a big one could be bias and either under or over interpretation, making assumptions on what that quote is and what you think they want you to think. And often students get caught into that. And I think immediately recognizing that maybe you just need to step back from that and really look at the quote and try to almost literally interpret what it's saying without making those extra assumptions. And it's the same thing that students do with sort of section 3. And then really just use the questions to guide you, because sometimes even if you might interpret it a certain way, you look at the options and it's sort of directing you in a different direction. So step 1 would be obviously take away biases, read the quote, forget about all the external fluff and think about what really the meaning of the quote is. And then number 3 would just be use the questions to guide you, and then the normal techniques like elimination, thinking about your tone, vocabulary, all the other skills in section 1 that students use.
Yeah, because I can imagine that the options A, B, C, and D would be they're very clever. The ACER markers, I like to call them evil geniuses, because some of the stuff they come up with is. Some people consider it evil. I think it's brilliant because it just makes me laugh how they come up with this stuff. I can imagine that the options kind of would be the ones that people would assume, they kind of think of what a student's going to think, but versus what we actually want is the correct answer. So that'll be a challenge there as well. But that's a really interesting kind of a shift this time round that we haven't seen very often. But like I said, it's about thinking on the fly and using skills you have in other domains in the context that you're presented with. Now, this might not happen for March 2026, or it may. So you've got to be ready for it either way.
Yeah.
So the next thing that kind of surprised a few people was that section 1, if you don't know, is the humanities section. And so generally there are passages from different kind of literature writers like Emily Dickinson and all these kind of old English kind of things. But this time around, what they've done is that there are still passages, written text, but they are in the context or the theme, kind of clinical, doctor, hospital, surgeon type of passages. Because the criticism has been of this section is like, all right, so I want to be a doctor. Why do I need to interpret poetry? How is how are the metaphors of a river important in clinical care? Which they're not. However, the skill of being able to interpret and think deeply and see nuance and read between the lines and understand tone and the language are very important. And so what they've it sounds to me like what they've done here this year or this September is thrown in a couple of those surgical medical themed texts just to kind of ease people's kind of worries and concerns about that. So that's kind of happened a couple of times recently. I have heard that before. So they're kind of adding that more of that in.
Yeah. I remember, this is 5 years ago when I sat the GAMSAT. I remember the year before, I was preparing for March, and we heard that the September year, the year before, is where they sort of brought in a lot of these kind of healthcare related scientific texts. But when I sat the GAMSAT, there was nothing related to that. So looks like they are bringing it back. And again, they might just completely switch over for March next year. Who knows? But yeah.
Yeah, I think the takeaway from that is it doesn't matter what the theme is. It's not about the theme. Just if you have had surgical or hospital experience, it's not going to make you any better at interpreting this passage than if you hadn't. It's about those skills that we teach and that are important, being able to interpret the deeper meanings of the passage, whether it's about surgery, a random house in the woods, the flow of a river, or whatever they come up with next. And the final thing this is kind of common every time, but people were commenting about the time pressure in this section, especially with the dense language and the long passages. And that's every time, and I think that comes down to the individual's preparation and exposure to the different types of passages and doing it under timed conditions. I think that's what this comes down to, really, is making sure that you're not doing a timed dense passage for the first time during the GAMP. It's that you've spent at least a couple of weeks, and that's what we talk about in the boot camp. Is in the last few weeks, it's all practice questions and exams and doing it timed, and so that you're exposed to that environment and you can function in it, and you have techniques to thrive as well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's what I tell students, control as much as you can, because the one thing you genuinely cannot control is what will show up in the exam. And if you've done all these things like practicing to time, doing a variety of different texts, controlling your day, your mindset, etc., then you can panic a bit less when you see something that's so unfamiliar to you.
Yeah, and when you've practiced doing passages that are unfamiliar and you have a method for that, like we go through in the boot camp, then that's going to be, you're just going to go, oh, I've done this before. I've experienced unusual things before, so I know what to do. So the big takeaways for section 1 in that case: speed matters. Practice under timed conditions in the weeks leading up to the exam. Clinical texts are fair game. So the passages might be on healthcare themed things, or it might not be. It's not really about that. It's about being able to interpret the passage either way. Quotes, it could be short quotes, very vague, and you need to really pull them apart effectively, like Urvi was talking about, or it could be long passages. So it is that expect the unexpected, and being ready for what they might throw at you. So then moving on to section 2. This was an interesting one this year. What are your thoughts on the reports from this one, Urvi?
Yeah, very mixed thoughts. And again, it depends on what themes people got, and everyone has a different way of interpreting what they have. And sometimes the grass always seems greener. But a few themes were, I think, fair and students would have practiced. But I think across the board, a lot of the themes were sort of very new, kind of difficult in a sense that students wouldn't have practiced or thought about some of these themes. So for example, task A included originality, evidence, traditions, news media, and thrill seeking, out of which I think news media is one that students would have perhaps practiced, but the rest seem a bit interesting. And then task B included amateurs, pity, motivation, style versus fashion, and stories. So I'd imagine,
and that's why I talk about the big evil geniuses. Like that is like, where do they come up with this stuff? Seriously, like that is left field.
Absolutely.
And they keep surprising us. It's great.
And when I do my section 2 classes and I think about themes for students, I try to think very, very outside the box, and I have never really gotten to think about something like thrill seeking.
Yeah.
So
you think that's not a GAMSAT topic.
Yeah.
But then, look, but again, there are ways to prepare for this. Like you run a class, Urvi, about difficult themes or unexpected themes, and what do you do about that? So even with this, they can come up. That's why I laugh, because I'm like, it's like water off a duck's back, because there are techniques for this. And I enjoy to see what they come up with next, because I know that we can handle it and we can address this if you have, if you've prepared in an effective way. But so what do you do when you come up with a theme like thrill seeking?
Again, I think the first most important thing is mindset. I tell students that if you see a theme that completely throws you off, the first step is to try not to panic, because that will throw everything out the window. Because I genuinely believe if students have done the preparation, and even if they haven't, even if, let's say, you take anyone on the street and ask them about thrill seeking, they can give you a 10-minute speech about their thoughts, right? And so everyone has the ideas in them. It's just about putting that to paper and sort of extracting that during the exam. So if I saw something like this, obviously, control myself, tell myself it's going to be okay, and then really stick to the basics. So you really need a framework, and that's what we talk about, something that will help you immediately come up with an idea, think about your structure, think about your examples on the spot. And I'm assuming I would have practiced that for months and months and months. And then just sticking to that and sticking to the basics, because often, even if something is really unfamiliar and you go back to the basics, you will always be able to get to an answer, get to a solution. And I remember, like, my way of sort of doing the GAMSAT essays was thinking about, like, my sort of framework was how society thinks about this, or how society, like, will impose a certain theme on individuals, what the norm is, right? And so I could immediately then, with that framework, think about what people think, what society tells us about thrill seeking, and how, whether it's like something that is imposed, how people feel about it, what it does to people's mindsets, how that shifts the way we think about things, act, etc. And then now
Yeah.
there is a series of thoughts lined up.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, like, is it appropriate for the young people, for elderly? At what point is it dangerous? Is it safe?
Yeah.
Is it okay within controlled environments, within non-controlled environments? Where does it get too much?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. All right. So all of a sudden there, you've got a ton of ideas on the very left field, unexpected topic of thrill seeking. Awesome.
And
awesome.
Yeah, you can do that for all of these themes, I think. And I heard that from students as well when I sort of, talked to a few of them after the exam. It was the same thing of the themes really threw me off, but I took a step back and used a framework and went back to my basics, and I was able to finish my essays. And I think that felt really good to hear as a tutor.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a really important insight that it seems people might brush it off, but I think it's so important, because on the day of the exam, there is so much pressure. It's one day out of a whole year, or maybe even 6 months if you're lucky, right? To get this right. And you've prepared for months, and all of a sudden the nerves are already high. And you get this topic that's unexpected, and you can go in one of two ways. Either, oh my God, this is crap, I can't do this, and you just throw it out the window, and and the whole thing's a mess. Or you still have that little bit of panic. Oh my God, this was unexpected. But then you think, you stop, you take a step back, and you think, okay, I can actually do this. Let's think back to the techniques that I've learned, all the practice that I've done. Let's implement that step by step, and let's go through it. And that's a completely different outcome as a result. And I think people can go one of two ways, and that can be the deciding factor, even for people who have prepared, right? Even for people who have prepared, but they expect it to go perfectly on the day.
Yeah.
And it never does, because conditions are never perfect, but we need to thrive despite that.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, often mindset is the make or break for a lot of people, because if it is a difficult theme, everyone will find it difficult. And so objectively, everyone will write maybe not the essays they were writing with comfortable themes, right? So that average score would drop. But again, it's like, I think thinking about that, then students, you can be at an advantage if you go in with the right mindset and you stick to the basics and you make something good, a good essay out of something that everyone has found really difficult and everyone's sort of losing it a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, because it is on like, if you think about the marking, it's on a bell curve. Yeah. So they fiddle around with the scores to make sure that everyone fits neatly on that bell curve. And if most people are scoring poorly, they're going to shift it all around. And if you're doing just better than everybody, even though you might not think your essay was amazing, but it's better than everybody else's, you're still going to be on the pointy, the good end of that bell curve. All right, so you've got to be ready for abstract and philosophical themes. I think that's a big kind of takeaway here. Things that come across as very vague. Themes like stories, right? And then if the theme seems vague, I think a big takeaway here is to go, all right, what about the individual quotes? Because the quotes generally take an angle on that theme, a different angle on that theme, which isn't as vague. Which can be a bit of a prompt and a bit of a clue as to some ideas that you can take. So I think a tip here is to practice writing on very general themes like chaos, silence, failure, winning, like all these different kind of very vague things, and get out of your comfort zone and work on them there. Cool. Any other thoughts on section 2, Urvi, from what you've heard?
I think the important thing is your creativity is important, perspective is important, but also really sticking to what you know and not stressing about writing the most unique thing and spending 10 minutes trying to come up with something and then changing it over and over again. And having a solid structure, because without a structure, everything crumbles. And I've heard this in the past from a lot of students where they went in panicking, time's running out, and they didn't plan an essay. They just write, and it's just like a word salad without structure. So that's really important. The main things to practice. Yeah, definitely.
And that's something that ideally you're not really thinking about on the day of the exam. You just do it.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly
You just implement it because you practiced it so much in the lead up. Awesome. Now section 3, the big one. All right. This one's always a surprise. Right. I don't think there's a year or an exam where people don't come out going, "Oh my God, it's changed. It's different. Back to the drawing board, guys." And I'm like, no, that's what it does every single time. Expect the unexpected. That's literally what the GAMS and section 3 are about. Now, the basic 75 questions, that's to be expected. Now, and the other thing is that with every GAMS, we'll hear reports of people saying there was no chemistry, and other people saying it was all chemistry. So, a couple of things to take from that is, firstly, there are different versions of the exam that people see. So not everyone sits the exact same exam with the exact same questions. They mix the questions around, and that's particularly easy to do. I mean, they used to do it back in the olden days when we did it on paper before COVID, but now that it's digital, that's easy to do. So easy for them to do, to swap out questions and randomize them or whatever. So that's the first thing. Not everyone's doing the same exam. The second thing is that, the way that I find that the way that students interpret the actual tests, so it could be within the context of chemistry, but you're really just looking at graphs. So it's no like real chemistry involved. It's interpreting graphs and flowcharts. Or it could be the other way around. There are lots of graphs and flowcharts, but it's just a chemistry question. So that's the other thing. So, but from this exam, the big kind of the common kind of feedback that we're receiving is that there was a lot of visual stimuli coming up. A lot of flowcharts, diagrams, images, and really complex ones. There was one about the circadian rhythm of a bug or something, of a fly.
Of course, it's an animal.
Yeah, something you've never covered and you're not expected to have covered. But a circadian rhythm in plant cells. So essentially how plants sleep.
Definitely and that's the thing. I like, in a way, is sort of evil somehow it sounds. I like students that sit the GAMSAT to actually realize this, and then they finally get that this is really an exam that is based on reasoning skills, and no amount of content will actually prepare you for this exam. And I think I heard from a lot of students that everyone was like, I get what you mean by this is not like, yes, the content is important, but it's about reasoning. And so many students said that to me at the end of the exam. So it's one of those things where, regardless of how much content you've studied, there will be things that require you to step outside of that and really focus on reasoning, interpreting, extrapolating all the skills that we normally teach in our classes.
Yeah, and I think that's super important, because people get hung up on knowing more knowledge. Now, not understanding the topics is important, but there comes a point where learning more is not going to help, and it's actually holding you back and probably making your scores worse, because people are so caught up in, but I haven't studied this topic. That's kind of what happens in the GAMSAT in section 3, like circadian rhythm of a plant cell. You're not going to cover that. There were 3D graphs, cycling, all the kinds of pathways. So it's that skill that's super important. The other thing that people get kind of caught up on are the ACER sample questions and then saying, oh, no, they're not a good reflection of the actual exam. They're not meant to be. Or they are, but they're not. Because it's a skill. It's not that they're going to ask those types of questions. Rather, they're going to be testing those types of skills. Now, skills can be tested in multiple different ways. So I like to use sporting analogies, right? And so, for example, when I'm thinking of I know in the recent Olympics, there were the whitewater rafting. There were the two sisters that really did really well for Australia. Just thinking back to whitewater rafting. When someone learns the skill of whitewater rafting, they've probably got a specific river that they go down, and they go do that over and over again, and they get really good at that river. And at the Olympics, they're testing their skill of whitewater rafting. So they give them a different track, a track that they have, or a river that they haven't experienced before. And because they're not going to give them the exact same one, they're going to give them all these different unexpected loops and eddies and all these different things that they do there, right? But they're still testing the same skill, just in a different context, in a different way. So the important thing is to be able to make sure that in the lead up to the exam, you're working on these skills across different types of practice questions and different types of stimulus material, and really focus in on the skill rather than that question itself or even that topic itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what it gets down to, and that's what, like, hopefully none of us sitters have to redo it, but I think they're kind of, some of them are mentally preparing for that, and their biggest takeaway is that it's really like a skill-based exam, and yes, the content is important, but they just need to really extract and bring out those skills, because they're not things you'd use in your everyday life as well, right? You're not looking at complex graphs or complex flowcharts in your everyday life, and so it's not something that you're going to get overnight, and it does take a lot of practice and really immersing yourself in that kind of context, those kinds of questions, to then comfortably be able to interpret them and get to a solution.
I agree, and I think sometimes it takes people a GAMSAT attempt to actually realize that. Because if you've listened to any of our stuff, you would have heard us talking about reasoning skills and the skills involved, and people are like, but what about the chemistry topics? What about the physics topics? And then we teach them the physics topics and the chemistry topics and the reasoning skills, but they kind of just brush over the reasoning skills because they need to know the topics. But then there's, I call it the epiphany, the science epiphany. They have that moment where they go, holy crap, it is about reasoning. And we hope that they have that before the GAMSAT, that in the lead up to it, because then your preparation shifts and your results shift. But sometimes people need the actual exam, sit the exam to have that realization. And that's kind of what you're hearing there from some of the students. And at the same time, they're probably being a bit hard on themselves. Generally, people who are conscientious and working really hard, they think they're going to fail, but they're not. They're probably doing really well. So I think it's probably some of that going on as well. But we're hearing that there wasn't as much of the traditional science stuff like moles or PhD calculations or buffer systems. But other people are saying that there was a large amount of physics with buoyancy, optics, torque, magnetism, circuits. Those are very kind of traditional GAMSAT physics topics. Now, a bit of a disclaimer there, that might not come up for the next one. Right? And a lot of embedded maths. There was talk about that as well. And I think maths is I'd say it's in the reasoning skills category.
I agree. Because you can't really memorize math. I think maths is a skill that you learn how to do. And for example, you learn how to do math in school, and you don't really forget it, right? Because it's a skill. You don't forget how to do a skill. You don't forget how to ride a bike. You don't forget how to drive a car, because it's a skill that when you learn and practice, it just stays with you. And it's the same thing with math. And what really needs, because you're not going to memorize how to do a scientific notation or how to do a log. You're going to practice it and then you'll just know how to do it. I haven't forgotten any of the stuff I've learned. So it's about sort of reshifting the way you think about content and sort of translating it from this is just information to actually these are skills and these are ways to think about things rather than just know things.
Yeah. And for some people, they might need to have a refresher on some of the maths,
Yeah.
but that's going to be that's an important GAMSAT skill. One that we go over in the boot camp quite extensively, and then in the actual practice. So the big takeaways for anyone doing the March one are that this is a reasoning exam. If you haven't picked up on that, you do need to know some of the sciences, and we covered that in our bridging course, but it's the reasoning that is really being tested. You should spend a lot of time practicing data interpretation, graph translation, reversing, reasoning through diagrams. Content isn't dead, but it's background, right? And so it's about your ability to think like a scientist and not just memorize facts. Cool. All right. So that's really insightful things there. So for just kind of going off script here a little bit, Urvi, you're starting your internship next year. You're probably not going to be thinking about GAMSAT anymore at that point. But if you were to give people some parting words of wisdom that you've, from the things you've learned doing your own exam, but then also coaching so many people over the last 4 years, what are some big kind of takeaways, important themes and lessons and tips that you could offer?
Yeah. So the first one I'd say is really stick to the basics of all the sections. It's very easy to get caught up into what you think should be done. And I'm sure, like, after knowing how September has just, gone for a lot of students, you might see students focusing a bit extra on healthcare text or extra on graphs and diagrams, and then none of that could come up in March, right? So sort of having an unbiased approach to your study and making sure that you are covering the important basics of content, but also really focusing on skill acquisition. The other thing that I sort of wished I did that I now tell students is to really unpack and analyze the questions that they are getting wrong and to sort of like make a little Excel spreadsheet on, am I getting this wrong? Because, okay, what if I got question 2 wrong? Is it physics, chemistry, or bio? What topic is it? And what skill did it require? Did it require a graph interpretation, maths, vocabulary, whatever it may be? And so using your study actively to keep improving, because otherwise you can do a lot of questions and stay in that loop of not improving. And then I think just lots and lots of simulated practice, really. Mock exams, timed conditions, unfamiliar themes, being exposed to as much unfamiliarity as possible, because that's what students hate. That's what we all hate, but that's what will actually prepare you for the GAMSAT.
Yeah. And what about for people who don't have a science background, who are like, but the chemistry?
So interestingly, there was one of our boot campers that joined and did the September GAMSAT. He has an extensive background in philosophy and the arts. So loves section 1 and 2, but has no idea about section 3. And he messaged me after the GAMSAT saying it was, and this is for all of you without a science background, will reassure you. He said, on the one hand, this was a plus because there was no need to worry about specific pieces of extrinsic knowledge. On the other hand, it meant very few of the questions felt familiar. And so the biggest takeaway was how little prior science knowledge was needed. That being said, I'm not telling you don't do sciences. Learn the content. That's why we do our basic bridging course classes, which cover the basics. And use that, understand that, and then apply in the context of questions.
Yeah, and we like to split it up into 3 kind of parts in the boot camp. So the first part, particularly for people who have no science background, is learning or understanding some of those basic sciences. But that finishes eventually, right? And the second part is being able to then use them with reasoning skills and incorporate the reasoning skills and start thinking in a very fluid way with those topics. And then the third part is applying a lot of those skills to actual questions. And if you can get the mix of those three aspects right, that is how you thrive in this exam. And you know, the challenge is making sure that you are actually getting that mix right. And that's what we do in the boot camp. That's kind of how we support our students. But thank you for that, Urvi. And thank you for your help in the boot camp over the many years. You're handing the torch over to Will as the lead tutor. He was a former boot camp member who got an incredible score in the science section and is now a university of, he's at the Canberra University, Medical School at Canberra, Australian National University, ANU, and he's a medical student. I think he's second year. And so he's going to be taking over. Hopefully he can do as good a job as you, Urvi, but I'm sure there's going to be a great transition period.
Yes.
And I'm really looking forward to see what we can go from here. But I'm looking forward to hearing about your internship. Thank you for today. And for everyone listening, this has come to you from the people on the front lines, the students, our tutors, and take this as a great gift for the March GAMSAT, how to prepare, what to think about, how to think differently, how to make sure that you're ready for the unexpected. And if you want more help, go to the show notes and we can help you out there. But that's it for today. Thank you, Urvi. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Tom.
Hey, I have a cool gift for you, just for listening to the Nurses Doing GAMSAT podcast. We do some of our best work in our Facebook group called, you guessed it, Nurses Doing GAMSAT. It's free to join, and every day we're sharing actionable guides, tips and tricks, and really just how to smash the exam and get into medicine. You can join today by searching Nurses Doing GAMSAT on Facebook. Thanks for listening to another episode, and I'll see you next time.